I'm going to welcome everybody to today's workshop, which has been organised by the OPD Partnership Working Group, although I can still aware that a lot of people are still joining. But if we don't make a start with at least the welcomes, we're going to run out of time. So my name's Jazz Shaban. I'm one of the co-coordinators of the OPD Partnership Task Team. My colleague, Marique, now I'm going to completely ruin the pronunciation of your surname. So I'm going to say Boris Samat is going to be, who's from the Community Intervention Task Team. He's going to be moderating, and we greatly together welcome everyone to this workshop looking specifically at participation space. So I'm just going to start with just a few little bits of housekeeping before we move into the main discussion. So please do note that this session is being recorded and will be uploaded onto the IDD, whatever that is, YouTube channel after this session. There will be captioning and ISL interpretation. That's going to be happening throughout. The link to the captions has been inserted into the chat box. So you just click on that and it will come up in a separate window. We do want this to be a very interactive session, quite alongside the discussions from our panelists. So please post any questions you have in the chat box. And if there is any clarification needed, I will call out. Please do add your name and your organization in the chat box when you're adding questions, because obviously that helps us kind of identify kind of the context, I suppose, for the question. So that's great. And that's also useful for the recording and also for the reporting afterwards. If you do need to intervene during the roundtable, please do use the raise hand icon. I will just put a note again in the chat box, and the moderator and myself will give you the floor. Okay, so that's all the housekeeping sorted out. So I'm going to pass on to Marique to take us through what I hope will be a lively discussion. Thanks very much. Marique.
Thank you, Jazz, and welcome everybody. We are happy to have you in, it looks good numbers present at this webinar. I would like to start with a thank you to two other people. You've seen Jazz already, who has been part of the organization of this webinar. There's two other people. Ruby is present today. She has also put a lot of work into the organization of this webinar. And Karen, who is part also CBID task force together with myself. So this is a webinar organized both by the DPO task group as well as the CBID task group. So I'm very happy to be with you all. For those who didn't catch it yet, my name is Marieke Boersma, and I'm one of the co-chairs of the CBID task group. The topic of civic space is an important topic to both of our task groups. And we both of the task groups, not we both people, felt that it would be important to share with you examples from people in the field. And I think we managed quite an exciting combination of people from different corners of the world. And a special thank you to our participant from Fiji, for who it is already past 10 in the evening and who is joining us today. So we're very happy to be able to give you a glimpse into what is happening around participation in the civic space from different corners of the world. And yeah, we're looking forward to that. I can't see at the moment of people coming in. We have invited 4 speakers to this forum, and I haven't seen one of our speakers coming in yet. I will introduce her. If she does not manage to connect, we have already decided how we are going to take care of that amongst the other 3 speakers. So the 4 speakers will give a bigger introduction of themselves in a bit. I'm just going to introduce the names and where they're from, and then they will each have around 4 minutes to introduce themselves. After that, we will let them present some of their experiences through some questions. And after that, there will be space for you to interact with our speakers and with each other, through questions. So I'm very happy to introduce our speakers to you. Setareki Matanawi is from the Pacific Disability Forum and based in Fiji. We hope that Pratima Gurung will still join us from the Indigenous Persons with Disability Global Network in Nepal. We have Agustino Lado from the South Sudan Union of Persons with Disabilities. And we have Deborah Leo from Civic Space based in South Africa. So I will give the floor now to you, and let's do it in the same order as I announce you now. So please, Seta, will you introduce yourself in about 4 minutes time? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Marik. I hope I'm coming out clearly through the this platform.
Very clear.
From Fiji, as Marika said, Setareki Madanoi is my name, or Seta for short. And I work with the Pacific Disability Forum as CEO for a little over 10 years now. And also want to thank the organizers, IDDC, and particularly the groups, the 2 groups that are responsible for this particular session. We are a regional disabled people's organization, TPO or OPD, working across about 22 Pacific Island countries, the US territories and the French Pacific territories in this region. A membership of about 70 members, a majority of which are organizations of persons with disabilities. Both these 2 are the organizers of this particular session. We do identify with the 2 groups within the IDDC in terms of CBID, Community-Based Inclusive Development. We've set up the Pacific CBID Regional Forum, and also, of course, as being a regional OPD organization in the Pacific, our focus on capacity building of organizations and the services that we do provide. We do work closely with the CBM, an IDDC member in our region, both New Zealand and Australia. This topic is very, very close to our work, to our hearts. I was going to say as well, in terms of disability inclusion. For our work to succeed, we need to be working with our partners, and in this space, the civil society space, we are hearing about it, we've seen it, it is definitely shrinking. And it's a good topic for us to be talking on and share experience this evening. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Seta, for this introduction and for setting the scene. Agustino, will you come next in introducing yourself?
Thank you very much, Marin. I cannot recognize her name exactly. Yes, I'm glad to be a part of this platform. My name is Agustino Lario, the chairperson of South Sudan Union of Persons with Disabilities. South Sudan Union of Persons with Disabilities is still, I think, almost 1 year. It was established in 2016, and it was registered as a legal entity in 2012. It is made out of 8 OPDs, organizations of persons with disabilities, who are based here in Juba. However, we are also looking forward to bring the other OPDs from the states. In fact, we are working in collaboration with partners like Light, for example, Light for the World and CBM and Humanity and Inclusion. And these are some of the organizations that we are working together. In fact, we are trying. Of course, we are still starting. We are still in square one, and we are working hard to influence or to empower our OPDs to advocate for their rights, for their inclusion, the full inclusion in a civic space and also in any public arena. And of course, we in South Sudan, we are still behind. We have a lot of do. There is a lot of a negative attitude towards people with disabilities. So these are the areas that we are working on awareness, raising that to remove these barriers so that people with disabilities are also given full participation in the civic space and also in the public arena as any person in the society. So this is what we, this is the role of the DPOs to it is carrying awareness, raising also to empower. This is a brief about South Sudan Union of Persons with Disabilities.
Thank you very much, Agustino. Great to hear. And I think that's one of the nice things of this group. We have very new and new groups and experience of engaging freshly in this civic space and people who have done so for many, many years. So I would like to move on to Deborah. Please introduce yourself.
Hi, good afternoon or evening or morning, everyone. So my name is Deborah Leo. I work as a researcher at Civicus, which is a membership alliance with more than 9,000 members in around 175 countries. Our membership is made up of organizations and individuals that are committed to strengthening civic participation in civil society around the world. And as part of that mandate, to promote the space for civil society, we produce research on the trends and developments affecting civic space. So our key program for this is Civicus Monitor, which is where I particularly work. It's a dynamic online tool that draws information directly from our members and partners around the world in 196 countries. So our goal is to share reliable, up-to-date data on the state of civil society freedoms in all countries and provide a basis for comparison for the situation between them, which we believe allows us to learn about the ways in which our right to participate is being either realized or challenged. So this allows us, for instance, to draw attention to countries where there is a serious or rapid decline in respect for civic space and create campaigns and programs to support human rights defenders in countries around the world. So while our work is really focused on international advocacy, it's grounded on the demands from our members. So in my case, for instance, I focus on research and advocacy in the countries in the Americas. In the past months, one example of work that we've done is working with organizations in Nicaragua to produce report on the restrictive laws that were passed, especially at the end of last year, and the harassment that journalists, activists, dissidents have faced for the past 3 years. So we use this kind of research, for instance, to advocate for a resolution at the Human Rights Council to support closer monitoring of the human rights crisis there. And we also worked with local civil society and lawyers, in particular families of political prisoners, to highlight cases of persons who have been in prison for their activism. So for instance, we created a campaign called Stand as My Witness that you can all look for. It's still ongoing, but it advocates for the release of political prisoners and also calls attention to the situation that they face in multiple countries, especially in light of the COVID-19 pandemic. So this is just an example of our work around Civic Space. We also run several different programs aimed to support human rights defenders, for instance, in Central America, by providing them with training on security, building resilience, and advocating and campaigning for their rights. And so this is just a sample of what we do. And later I'll present a little bit of the findings that we've had around how civic space around the world is being respected or challenged.
Thank you very much, Deborah. As I said, quite a variety of people and a variety of experience. So I'm really looking forward to your presentation in a few minutes. I've seen that Pratima is with us. Welcome, Pratima. Would you be kind to introduce yourself as well?
Thank you. Thank you. So good afternoon, and I don't know, good evening and good morning to all of my friends over here. So I'm very much thankful for IDDC for providing this opportunity. I am Pratima Gurung, and I work for indigenous people with disabilities in my country. And I do work at the regional and global level. Right now, I represent the national organization called National Indigenous Disabled Women Association of Nepal, and which works for young indigenous women with disabilities. And for me, in today's event, I'm asked and suggested to present more about the challenges and the perspectives from an intersectional lens. So I would be highlighting some of the focus on those areas, because we work on indigenous person with disabilities who comprise of 54 million indigenous people, 28 million indigenous women with disabilities all around the globe, and 1.3 million indigenous people with disabilities in my country. So when it comes to people with disabilities, we know that people with disabilities face discriminations both in various forms, both at public and private sphere. And when these realities and struggles are again added from gender and indigenous or ethnic identity, it forms it further aggravates the compounded form and the result of isolation, marginalization, and exclusion for indigenous persons with disabilities having multiple identity. So having known about these realities, we work on the most marginalized group is underrepresented groups at the grassroots level and national level, and also at the global level. And when we talk about how do we work on the grassroots level, one of the things that we highlight is about the inclusion, intersectionality, and human right-based approach is one of our fundamental core that we have been highlighting. And we work with a different constituency. At the national level, we work with youth and disability, indigenous, and women constituency. So primarily we work with 4 constituency and also with the different CSOs. And we try to bring the lens of inclusion, disability, intercultural perspective, and gender perspective. This is how we have been working at the grassroots level, and that grassroots level is again further linked at the global level. So when it comes to our work within the disability constituency, I would just like to highlight some of the few things, and then that can be further added in the next presentation. So one of the realities that we have so far faced from our brothers and sisters and within the disability movement and constituency, that most often we as indigenous women with disabilities, we are most often we are told that we need to demand our rights We need to demand our space within the indigenous movement. So this is what we have been requested by the disability movement and constituency, and vice versa. This happens in our day-to-day lives. So when this kind of challenges are faced in our day-to-day realities as indigenous persons with disabilities, we are also trying to work to frame our narratives and to look for a different kind of paradigm shift, because we know that we are person with disabilities, and person with disabilities are not homogeneous group. And when we look at disability is a diverse, it's a complex, sensitive, and evolving concept. But for us, as a groups who have multiple and intersecting identities, we are still questioning, and we are looking at these statements, that where are these statements framed, for whom, and who have we related these statements, and when. So for us, it is very time to rethink about what kind of work have we done so far. If we look at the national policies that are framed at the national level, we see the national policies are framed in a very monolithic. It is framed in a single linear approach that does not address the heterogeneity and the diversity of disability. So I will just pause here, and we can have further conversation in the next what do you say, in the next question. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pratima, and thank you also for setting that scene and adding in the diversity and intersectionality. Thanks a lot. So now that we know our speakers, I would like to move back to Deborah and ask you, I know you prepared a presentation, to tell us a bit about Civicus and what is the state of the civic space today, and do you have any examples of it? So Deborah, over to you.
All right, I think you should be able to see my screen now.
Yes.
Yeah, okay, good. So before I go into the details of our findings about civic space, I think what's important is to highlight that for those who are not familiar with the Civicus Monitor, again,
sorry, Deborah, we now mainly see your notes and not so much a presentation anymore.
Oh, sorry about that. Let me see if I can share. Yeah, that's okay. All right.
Okay.
So our research is a collaboration between around 20 research partners that are regional organizations that then work with local, national, and international organizations to collect data on civic space in the different countries that we cover. And as I said, we are a dynamic online tool. We provide information that comes from these variety of sources, but it is important to say that we put the greatest weight on the sources that come from local and national level, because we believe that these are the people who best know the situation of civic space in their countries. Sorry, I don't know why. Oh. So what is it that we monitor exactly? We monitor the what we call civic space, the freedoms of assembly, of association and expression, underpinned by the state's duty to protect these freedoms. And so that's what our definition of civic space is. And we create a rating system through which each country is put into one of 5 categories. Open being the countries where the civic space freedoms are best respected, then narrowed, obstructed, repressed, and closed. So what have we found, right? Unfortunately, the research that we've conducted in the past few years has shown that civic space is actually declining around the world. As you know, a lot of the people in the world, around 87%, live in countries that we rate as closed, repressed, or obstructed. What that means is basically that their ability to organize, to speak out, to fight for their rights faces severe restrictions. Conversely, it means that only 3.4% of people live in countries that have open civic space where their freedoms are mostly respected. And so in the past year, in the past 2 years really, we can't really talk about civic space without talking about protests. And what we see is people taking to the streets in Nigeria, Belarus, the US, around the world to demand change, right? But as they've done so, we found that governments have acted often to restrict these rights to protest. And so in the past year, the violation of civic freedom that we most frequently documented was protesters being detained, which together with excessive use of force, meaning tear gas, sometimes even use of lethal force to disrupt protests, have been the most common tactics used by governments to restrict the right to peaceful assembly. And on the other hand, this is part of a bigger context where we see states acting more and more to silence dissent. And so among the most common violations that we've recorded has been, for instance, harassment and intimidation, which are tactics often used to silence activists and journalists and others speaking out on issues like corruption, environmental degradation, and political persecution. Censorship, which in 2019 was the top violation we recorded, and last year was the third top. Attacks on detention of journalists and the detention of human rights defenders as well as restrictive laws which affect all of these different freedoms. We also know that this is actually an uneven crisis because although everyone is affected by shrinking civic space, we know that the people on the ground, especially those protesting, are the ones most often affected by restrictions. Journalists are also among those that are very commonly targeted. And we also know that certain groups face more restrictions or face bigger challenges when trying to exercise their rights in the different regions. So women have been among the forefront of both the people fighting for rights, but also those who face violations, especially, for instance, on online harassment, but also, of course, other types of violations. It depends a lot on the region, but for instance, in the Americas, environmental groups and indigenous people have been among the groups that we've seen very commonly targeted as well. People fighting for labor rights, especially in Europe and Central Asia, and people who defend LGBTQI+ rights and youth in many different countries. So to be frank with you, when it comes to people with disabilities, our research still has a long way to go. Where we've most frequently recorded people with disabilities and restrictions to civic space or challenges related to civic space have been individuals, often individuals protesting. So for example, in El Salvador, we recorded groups of veterans with disabilities protesting against and speaking up about the fact that they have experienced the Civil War and they believe that peace and democracy is something that they need to defend. So we've seen groups coming out. We've also seen individual activists being affected by restrictions. So just last month, for instance, in the UK, we recorded the case of a young teenager with learning disabilities protesting against the police bill in the UK, who was, despite the fact that she identified herself as somebody with a disability, was mistreated by police who used excessive force to detain her. So we've recorded some individual cases, and in the case of this photo, for instance, we know that there have been some cases where organizations representing people with disabilities and people with disabilities have faced specific challenges. So for instance, in Poland in 2018, people, especially parents of children with disability, but also children with disability, occupied parliament for over a month. But during that month, authorities acted to restrict the protests as much as they could, not only by restricting access to the bathroom within the parliament because they were staging a sit-in, but also by restricting, for instance, the access of children's physiotherapists to the protests as well. So while we know that there are different aspects that we still need to develop research on this, I think it is very important to have this kind of conversation that we're having now, because it is clear that we still need to learn a bit more and develop a more intersectional lens when producing research on civic space. But finally, before I go, even though our findings and our top headlines paint a somewhat bleak picture, I would say that actually this is a story of hope. Because what we've seen in the past 2 years is also that people who have taken to the streets and people who have spoken up about issues that they care about and about their rights have been able to move things toward change in the past 2 years. We had some examples within the monitor that we've recorded. For instance, Chile just now had the election for the Constitutional Assembly, which was a direct result of the mass protests in 2019. We saw Black Lives Matter in the US and different countries, and we've seen people being incredibly resilient, even in face of very strong restrictions. And so before I close the presentation, I just want to say that actually this is a story of how civil society has continued to resist despite the shrinking civic space. And I hope that this is a good way to set up our conversation coming up.
Thank you very much, Deborah. Thanks for setting the scene and setting our scene. We in IDDC usually talk about disability specifically, but it's really great to set that within the global scene of civic space. And I already saw in the comment, thanks for the very nice pictures in the presentations to reflect that. So thanks a lot. I would like to move on to Agostino. And Agostino, I would like to ask you, so your network of organizations of people with disabilities is quite new. You are 1 year old. I think, if I'm not mistaken, you're also living in the newest country in the world. Yes. Might have missed another new country, but I don't think so. And I would like to ask you, how have you gone about energizing the network of diverse organizations with persons with disability to collectively get involved in the civic space alongside other social justice movements to influence your government? The floor is yours, Agostino.
Thank you very much for the question. As I've already put it, in fact, civic space for us in South Sudan is still very, very narrow. However, the realization of the rights of people with disabilities and their involvement in the civic space are the component of our advocacy program. We have in fact done a number of awareness raising campaign in collaboration with our partners here in Juba to strengthen the involvement or the network of our OPDs alongside the other social justice actors to influence the government to ratify the regional and the international protocols on the rights of people with disabilities, and also to implement our domestic policies to ensure the full involvement of persons with disabilities in decision making and participation in all spheres of life as enshrined in the international protocols. In fact, like it's also as like it's already the sustainable development goals agenda, that no one is left behind. In fact, still it is a challenger of us. However, we manage to influence our networking. Now, we have realized that there are some changes, and we are now involved in a civic space arena. However, we have a lot still to do, because most of our OPDs are based here in Juba, and we need to see that the OPDs that are coming up in the states are also strengthened, so that they can also work alongside with the social justice actors to influence the state government for the realization of and full involvement in civic space and even the public arena as any citizen in South Sudan. In fact, we are working closely with the partners, as I mentioned before, here in South Sudan, and also with the other civic, the social justice actors. For example, like SAFE4, which is the Community Empowerment Progress Organization, and it's also further the Foundation for Democracy and accountable governance. These are the social actors that we are working close with them, so that we, at the end of the day, may be involved fully in a civic space. This is briefly what I can mention. Anyway, we have realized some changes than before, that people with disabilities are now somehow involved and are able also to air out their grievances, and the community is now starting to realize their participation and decision making. Of course, sometimes back, people with disabilities, their potential were not realized. But now, with the coming of our DPOs, people have realized that persons with disability have a potential when they are given a space and opportunities to participate. So this is what we have done, and we are still working a lot to see that people with disabilities are fully involved in a civic space and decision making, and also their participation in all aspects of life, like any citizen in the country. So this is briefly what I can tell you. I don't know whether I've answered you. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Agustino, and thank you for sharing these experiences from South Sudan. I especially like the way you highlighted that entering the civic space needs both the understanding of the space you're entering, but also the confidence, empowerment of, in this case, people with disabilities to know that they can and have the capacity to enter that space. So thank you very much for sharing your experiences. I was just wondering, Seta, would you like to add anything on the same question from your quite longer, slightly longer, would not quite mention it, experiences from in 1 or 2 minutes?
Yes, I think the key Augustino mentioned for person disabilities or their represent, the work has to be done within first. Person disabilities, the capacity needs to be developed. They need to be confident. They need to be informed. They need to be empowered. And to be able to participate effectively and represent the issues alongside other civil society in advocating to governments. And that's something that we continue to work with our members in the Pacific. The realization that person disabilities, we don't live in isolation. We are part of a society, part of a community, and our issues, our fight, our battles need not to be ours alone. So recognizing that, acknowledging that, and then equipping ourselves appropriately will then be able to equip us with the right tools to then engage. Because for many reasons, person with disabilities may not have the education background, may not have undergone the training, but one thing that they need to know to value is their own lived experience on as individuals, and taking that to that space. And I think, and my other point is it's still in the same vein, in issues, areas where person with disabilities, how do the representative of the collective, the disability movement, there would be, say, persons with vision impairment or physical disability speaking, representing the disability community. They are the and it's a skill. It is experience how to make sure that when there is that one opportunity, you actually representing the collective voice, and that too can be very difficult in this context. So I think it's acknowledging that that there are capacity needs to be built for person with disability to be able to participate effectively and confidently, and also the need for them to maintain that united front, because opportunities do not are minimal, and when there is an opportunity to gain traction, to advocate, making sure that it's the representative voice of person with disabilities. So it's actually all human rights of all person with disabilities in that opportunity. That would be my addition. Okay, thank you.
Thank you very much, Seta. Some very good additions and experiences. I liked especially your sentence to recognize that the fight does not need to be ours alone. Thanks a lot for these additions. I would like to move on to Pratima. And Pratima, would you be able to share with us, based on your experience on working in the intersectionality, you already raised it in your introduction, what do you consider to be risks and challenges when working with the disability movement in coalition with other social justice movement actors? So Pratima, the floor is yours.
Thank you for your question again. So for me, from an individual level and from a institution level, I would say that working on intersectional and multiple groups, the first challenge that we have is within our constituency. And when I say within our constituency, I would like to frame that is further again divided in two parts. First is a individual label, where a person with disabilities, including women with disabilities or indigenous people or LGBTIQ with disabilities themselves do not understand about the overlapping and multiple and intersecting identities they have or they possess. They even do not know about the impact, the various types of impact in their daily lives. They're not able to articulate their identities, and they even do not know what does that mean in their lives. So this is one of the challenges at the individual level, but at the same time, we have also the other challenge that is related within our own constituency. For example, if you take the context of Nepal, the issue of indigenous people with disabilities is not still accepted as a human right issue or as a rights of person with disabilities in the context of Nepal. So that is one of the challenges that we have. And when it looks to other different, I see the same kind of challenges. For Bangladesh, we have the majority of indigenous people with disabilities, and they are still not recognized by the state. So that is the kind of challenges that we face within our own constituency. But at the same time, we also have challenges working with the different CSOs and working with the other constituency, like the women constituency, the indigenous youth, and other CSOs. Because most often we find that the narratives of marginalization is mostly framed by people who are in the power. So the power is one of the very predominant identity and predominant space that matters, that who is holding the power to whom. And when it comes to groups like multiple and intersecting identities, the use of power is very much limited. And as a result, we see that there is limited participation of those underrepresented groups. So these are the kind of challenges that we have so far been facing as a groups with multiple and intersecting identities. But however, having said all these challenges, I would also like to highlight that we also do have the opportunities sometimes. And if we can use these limited opportunities that we have as a multiple and intersecting identities, we can say, and we have proved that we can influence the different movements and different CSOs. And this is what we have so far done at the national level to the global level. We have been able to influence the cross-movement collaboration, build allies and networks within the different constituency. And for that, we have been continuously being very loud and proud. We are proud of what we have. And we are accepting and we are acknowledging and admitting our identity as an indigenous person with disabilities within the disability, within the indigenous and within the other CSOs movement. And that has opened the avenues for us that today we are not able to only highlight ourselves as a vulnerable group, as a marginalized group, but we have also provided solutions. We have also paved the ways that we are contributors in the society that we live and in the family that we live. So that is why we have framed those narratives. And for that, what we have so far done at the national to the global level is we have been vocal. We have been very much strategic, and not all the strategies works for all the constituency. And this is what we have seen. So we have applied different kind of strategies and different kinds of methods in doing our advocacy from global to the national level at the grassroots level. And in that regard, I would also like to highlight that meaningful participation and respect for the diversity of all persons with disabilities is very much crucial. The second thing that I would like to emphasize is about the respect of individual and collective rights. When it comes to indigenous people, sometimes our identities are overlapped, and sometimes we feel that we are nowhere. And that is why we urge all our brothers and sisters, all our allies, and also the constituency to respect both the individual and collective rights, and also frame them in a very intersectional manner so that we can reach the most marginalized group, including indigenous persons with disabilities and frame the narratives of inclusion, leaving no one behind. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pratima. I can hear from you that you you have many years of activity, and I love the way you're speaking about this issue. I'm going to break our flow a little bit because I have the feeling that this is a very nice flow on to SETA, especially because you made the nice shift in from the challenges to the opportunities. So SETA, would you mind coming in again and sharing the opportunities that you have seen in the work you've done in Fiji, and especially in working in coalition with other social justice movement actors?
Okay. Yes. Yes. Well, thank you, Pratima, for sharing, as you always, intersectionality and the multiple identity of person disabilities when cut across to gender, to indigenous, and the work that you do there in Nepal. Opportunity is certainly for us, and I hear this question, my mind went back to when we first started the work in Fiji and in the Pacific, where in trying to in the days they were forming SDG, developing or discussing SDG, and those open forum, and even prior to that, when we talk about, in our case, the small islands developing states, in those discussions, in those conversations, where disability is not until lately became a stakeholder group. So of person disabilities, and one of the major groups in working with the UN. In those spaces where we are not represented, when we do not have a seat at the table, this is the business of alliance building. How do we then get allies on board that are at those spaces where we are not? So, and that's how the experience I've had in working with our partners, largely mainstream society, in growing the work on the disability inclusion, the recognition of rights of persons with disabilities, even way back in the 1990s in this region. It was it's a very new phenomenon. Persons with disabilities are largely invisible, and I was talking about the fight, the battle, already at an unlevel playing field. It's already pretty much talks about the balance of the power, the balance of power. So coming into that space, we just have to navigate the space with a lot of wisdom, and also the opportunity also to realize that if we cannot go to the end, there may be an opportunity to meet in the middle. So we have then pick key allies, largely interestingly the women's groups, because there, as you know, there's a women's major group, there's an NGO major group. So the work that we did in the regions largely with other NGOs, and asked them to be our voice when they're at the table, when they're talking to governments in the region. We attend their meetings. We are part of their mechanism. And in doing that, it rubs off as an emerging group, as something, somebody new to that field. You get to learn, you get to see, you get to hear how to operate safely, successfully, effectively in those kind of spaces. So the opportunity for me, I've just then a fast forward, probably end of last year. I Pacific Disability Forum and myself as focal point. Was a focal point of a Pacific Regional NGO Alliance platform. All the regional NGOs that address very different issues: women, economy, gender, environment, the church, you name it, the trade unions, education, and to be able to be rubbing shoulders with those leaders, and then asking them again the issue of the twin track approach, the mainstreaming, for them to include in their work issue disabilities, to share the load. As I said earlier, this fight need not to be ours alone as DPOs, as OPDs. So it's navigating the space safely, and what I found that has really helped. For us, an organization based in Fiji, when we go to different countries, we connect our newly established, because that's often the reality. OPDs are often one of the newer emerging groups that may be forming as a organized group in a country. The help for them is available in that country, and usually from other NGOs. So we connect those dots. We encourage them to build alliance with their allies, because as I said, they could be well assisted, supported by their own peers who they may be related to. They talk the same language, the same culture, and that's how I think we managed to grow in the region in the work that we do here, but also to gain traction into the work. I talked about SDGL, and I'll finish here. We were not allowed in some of those spaces. I talked about the small and developing states because we don't have actually a place at the table. So we talked to the indigenous group, we talked to the NGO group, we talked to the youth group, we talked to the women's group. If we could be sharing their space at those tables. And that's how we were able to get our points through. That's for it from me for now. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Seta, for these experiences, and making sure you're there sounds like an important message to me. And if you're not there, making sure you get the opportunity there through others. Would like to give the space before we go into answering the questions, first to Deborah and then to Agostino to give a shorter reaction on the two presentations we had now from Seta and Pratima. And as I give the word to Deborah, go ahead. I've seen some questions already. Post your questions in the chat so that we can start the discussion after that. Thank you.
Thanks for this. I think very similar to what others have said and Seta was saying. And previously, before joining Civic, as I worked on youth advocacy in Brazil, and the ways that we found to work in areas where we didn't have too much expertise were, for instance, partnering and working in coalition was probably the strongest way to do it. So for instance, as a youth group, we wanted to advocate for protection of environmental rights and for policies on climate change. And we had no expertise on litigation, for instance, so we partnered with lawyers organizations, particularly human rights lawyers organizations, and also environmental groups to create basically a legal case, much like in other countries where young people sue the state for the protection of the environment and for the adoption of stronger climate policies. And so working in coalition for me has been the strongest way. And so in this regard, when it comes to our work at Civic, as I'm improving our research on people with disabilities in civic space, I saw a question already on this. To be honest, I think spaces like this is what we're missing a little bit from our side, where we can engage with OPDs who have expertise. And I think, to be honest, our challenges are sometimes quite basic in terms of just making our materials accessible. We know that our platform isn't particularly inclusive and has to be improved in this regard. And so we absolutely need to draw on the expertise of organizations representing people with disabilities and working directly with people with disabilities to make sure that our research, our toolkits, our information on Civic Space on protecting our rights is accessible to everyone. So yeah, spaces like this and continuing the conversation is very important.
Thank you very much, Deborah. I've seen already a question from IDA, so you can jump on in a moment. Augustino, would you like to still share some experience or challenges you had in working together with the social justice movement, and then we'll move to the questions.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes, in fact, we experienced some challenges. To mention some, the negative attitude due to this is attitudinal barriers, the negative attitude of the society towards people with disabilities is one of the challenges that we are going through. People don't recognize that a disability is a cross-cutting issue, and sometimes they take it that disability is a curse, and so that the community sometimes they are not ready to interact with persons with disabilities. They cannot accept social disabilities even in social gathering. Yes, these are some of the things that are in fact affecting people with disabilities. And also the issue of for Asia in South Sudan, one of the challenges is maybe also reasonable accommodation. Because we have a diversity of people with disabilities, like the hearing impaired. We are lacking interpreters. So most of people with hearing impaired, they cannot access. They are not able to interact with the community, and this is also one of the risks. And so far they don't get information about what is going on because of the lack of interpreters. So these kind of people are not, in fact, they are not included in the society. And one way we see poverty sometimes is also risky, because people may see that people with disabilities cannot contribute. And also lack of capacity building is one of the challenges, because many people with disabilities are not informed about their rights in the society. So this also causes a risky, because they are not able to express their rights or their needs in the society. And also the problem, also one of the risks in especially here in our communities, we see sometimes South Sudan has been going for a long years under conflict, and still up to now there are some communal conflict that are going along in our communities. So these are some of the risks sometimes that cannot expose people with disabilities to interact. If movement is also one of these, because here we are sometimes, most of us, we are confined within the centers. We are not able to go down to the rural areas, to the outskirts, because of the insecurity. So these are some of the risks that are now confine us not to interact with the grassroots communities, and mostly of the people with disabilities. Some of them are in the rural areas. So it is not easy to meet them. And as I mentioned also, sometimes accessibility also is one of the challenges that sometimes we are not able sometimes to access some of the facilities, and also for especially those who are using sometimes the physical disability. Movement is a problem because of the distance. So they are sometimes left out in many occasions. Yes, so these are the challenges. So what we need to see that people with disabilities are given the opportunities, their capacity are built, they are empowered, socially and economically, so that they'll be accepted in the society.
Thank
so
you.
This is what briefly I can put as risks that are facing.
Thank you very much, Agostino. I would like to hand over to Jazz to prompt us towards the questions so we can start our interaction. Jazz.
Hello. You know what, that's been a great set of presentations. Thank you very much, everyone, for making them. We're now going to make this a little bit more interactive. It's just about me reading out questions from the chat box. So I'm going to dive straight in, and hopefully I'll kind of represent them as well as I can. If I can't, then I'll probably ask you to put your mic on and just kind of give a bit more. The first one actually is from Camilla from IDA, and she'd like to know how organizations like Civic Space could partner with OPDs to improve the research and data collection on civic participation of persons with disabilities, and if you actually have faced any challenges in reaching OPDs. So I'm gonna sling that one to Deborah to answer. Many thanks.
Thanks, Jazz. Yes, on the challenges, I'll start with that. To be honest, a challenge is just that we don't work with partners who specialize in this area. To be honest, we work with partners that are looking more at the regional level. And we need to do more, I think, to, as you say, partner with OPDs. Ways that we've done that before, not with people with disabilities, but producing information on refugees, for instance, is by creating thematic research where we partner with organizations working directly with refugees and with refugees themselves to produce research understanding what the policies that are needed to make sure that they can fully exercise their civil rights, and what are the specific challenges that they were facing. So we've done that with refugees, and now we're trying to do that with youth. And I think it is, we're open to any feedback and partnerships to also be able to do that with people with disabilities. And I think a general challenge, to be honest, is just to conduct research takes into account the different groups and the different challenges and the ways that we need to make sure that all of these different people are able to fully exercise their rights.
That's brilliant, Deborah. Thank you very much for that response. I'm going to sling us on to the next question, actually, because as they're coming in, but do keep them coming in. That's really brilliant. The next question actually is from Agna, who works for the MLR in Indonesia. Many thanks for the question. This question actually is for Augustine, although it says Mr. Jono, it is actually for Augustino. So it's about the participation of DPOs in the civic space, which obviously we've heard today certainly isn't happening. And therefore, have you got any insights prepared about in terms of strengthening how DPOs can actually be strengthened, and how you actually deal with the issues of stigma within the space and DPOs engaging? So Augustino, if you can respond to that, would be brilliant. You're on mute at the moment if you're talking. Augustino? I mean, I think this is probably a general question.
Yes.
You are there. Okay. Hi, Augustino.
Yes.
You're okay to respond to that. Brilliant. Thanks.
Yes. Of course, I mentioned, I talk about the capacity building, but I have not mentioned something about education. In fact, we as the network of persons with disabilities, we have been lobbying for the signing of inclusive education policy, because most of our members with disabilities are not attending classes. They are cut out because there is no inclusive policy. So we've been lobbying for the signing of this policy, and now the policy is already being signed, and it is going to be disseminated across the country, so that any learner with disabilities are accommodated in any school, like any child, because in fact, one of the challenges here in South Sudan is the issue of education, and also the modern technology. A few of us can access computer, and majority, in fact, cannot. So this is all about the education, the policy, inclusion policy is already signed, and we are going to disseminate across the country, so that any learner with disabilities is absorbed without any hindrance. So this is what I wanted to talk really about the issue of education here in South Sudan, for persons with disabilities particularly.
That's brilliant. Thank you very much, Augustino. And I think that's, I mean, very helpful insight indeed. There's actually an interesting question here from Alison Marshall from Subnational, and she's asking specifically about any examples of successful alliances between OPDs and women's organisations working together, particularly looking at things like sexual and reproductive health and rights. I'm guessing this is probably a good question for Pratima to answer, if you're willing and able to respond to that one.
Thank you for your question. And I would just like to give a concrete example of Nepal, where we have worked with Indigenous Women's Consortium. The consortium consists of 3 national organizations and also 84 district, province and local chapters here in Nepal. And we, as an organization of women with disabilities, we have worked very closely with them, with the international instrument that is CEDAW. So we have worked the alliance in the CEDAW, and we have framed the issue of sexual health and reproductive rights and violence against indigenous women, and also particularly focusing on women with disabilities. And by doing the cross-movement collaboration and also the networking and alliance with them, one of the very concrete examples that we have received in the concluding observation for the member states of Nepal in 2018 that clearly highlights about issues and challenges faced by multiple and intersecting groups like indigenous, it's not only indigenous, but Dalit, minority people, and also women with disabilities. And that has open and avenues for us to work in collaboration, and not only in terms of preparing the report for the CR report, but also working closely in collaboration with them, knowing about the challenges of women with disabilities from their perspectives, and also knowing about their perspective from our perspective. So now it has open avenues for us to work on the ground for the implementation of the CEDAW. Thank you.
Brilliant, thank you, Pratima. That's a very, very practical example there. Hugely, hugely useful. Do keep your questions coming. We've got another question actually from Maria Schulman, a fellow Leonard Cheshire colleague. Maria is asking specifically about education being one of the most important vehicles for driving societal attitudinal changes. So Augustino, this question is more for you, but could you perhaps say a little bit more about the progress that's been made by SUDP, which is obviously the newest of DPOs in South Sudan, in driving inclusive education policy within South Sudan Ministry of General Education?
Yes, I think we, in fact, as a union of persons, it's a legal representative of people with disabilities. Even before the union is formed, we've been pushing for these policies. For example, the UNCRPD, National Disability Inclusion Policy, and also the inclusive education policy. We've been lobbying the ministry, particularly the ministry of our partners and the Ministry of Education, to see that this policy is signed and ratified. So as they have said sometimes, some minutes ago, the policy is already signed, and what remains is now to be launched. And then after launched, it will be disseminated across South Sudan to the 10 states of South Sudan, even including the 3 administrative areas in South Sudan, because this policy, in fact, is a vehicle, as I've said before. One of the challenges that we are not able to participate fully, it is because of lack of education. As you see, is the long civil war in South Sudan. It has interrupted even the social and economic poverty in the country, and mostly the people who are affected are persons with disabilities. So this is why we've been lobbying strongly that to see that the inclusion education policy is ratified, so that any disability learner can join any school. Because here sometimes we have one school, that is Rajab Education Center for the Blind, and we have started integrating our learners to the schools just here in Juba, in the capital city. But when you go down to the states, most of persons with disabilities, particularly the hearing impaired and the visual impaired, are not enrolled in schools. This is because there is no regional accommodation. There is no sign language that the teachers who are trained so that they can handle these learners with hearing impaired. Also, there is no braille in the States. The only a few people, learners with disabilities, who are going to classes are here in Juba, because of the existence of Rajab Education Center for the Blind that was established by Norwegian Association of the Blind and partially cited sometimes back. And that school has been upgraded into a primary school. So many learners with the visual impaired are trained there, and we have integrated them to the ordinary school. But mostly people, the teachers even are not ready to accept our learners with disabilities, particularly the visually impaired and the hearing impaired, because they say that they are not able to handle this surgery. So for the signing of this policy, and I think it will be included in the education system of the country. So this, I think, may pave way for learners with disabilities to be enrolled in schools. So this is what I briefly I can say. Thank you.
That's brilliant, Augustino. I just noticed in the chat box that also the South Sudan Inclusive Education Policy is already signed.
Yes.
And actually will be launched next month, which is really great. And congratulations, Billy, for kind of pushing that through. Very encouraging, very encouraging. Okay, well, we're almost through with the questions, but there's one question actually from which I think would be quite a good one to wrap up on, from Ruby Holmes, who is a fellow co-coordinator on the OPD Partnership Task Group, and also who helped put together with this session. Ruby says, obviously, thank you very much for all your presentations. And what are the recommendations to ensure that we are supporting the next generation of youth with disabilities in civic space? Really important question, Ruby. Thanks very much. Now, I'm kind of wondering who to give that to. My gut is to ask Deborah to speak to that, but also I think Fatima, you could usefully also give a really good perspective on that as well. So who's happy to speak to that first?
Yeah, I can. Well, I can give 2 cents, I suppose.
Fantastic.
We know from our research in civic space that youth is among the groups that are often impacted, if only because we know that youth often play a big role in protest movements, for instance, but also, of course, as human rights defenders themselves. And so I feel like, at least from my side, we need to do a lot more to make sure that our movements are inclusive, that they're producing accessible materials, for instance, on people's rights, so that people are able to learn about their rights in different ways. I also know, having been a youth activist, that often human rights research or human rights advocacy itself is not really made for youth. Young people want to engage much more on activism and much more learn through videos, less through PDFs, that kind of thing. And so we need to make sure that our movements are catering to young people's demands and young people's leadership, and particularly to young people with disabilities. But I think I can learn a lot more from the other speakers on the panel about that as well.
That's great. Thank you, Deborah. Fatima, did you want to say, just add briefly to what Deborah has been saying there?
Yeah, just to add on what Deborah has said, I just wanted to highlight that what we have realized so far in the whole disability movement, in the whole CSOs movement, one of the gaps that we have highlighted about the single identity. So if we are framing in a single identity, that will not work. So we have to break the silos of the single identity, within the box. And by saying that, I just wanted to highlight the gap of the whole CSOs movement, including the disability movement, is we have not realized to build the synergy of intergenerational network, which is very crucial to bring young people with disabilities in with us. And by that, I would say that promoting and enhancing their leadership is very much crucial. But at the same time, I would also just want to highlight that young people are very much advanced than us. The technology has made us in a very different mood, in a very different world. So realizing their issues, understanding their problems, understanding the challenges, and understanding the way they want to do the advocacy is very much crucial. Otherwise, if we say that the advocacy that we have been doing and the advocacy that they need to be done, if we frame in that narrative, that will not work. So that is why we need to understand the values and also the challenges that youth are facing at this moment. We need to also provide a space that how do we enable young champions? So we need to build a space to create young champions so that they will be building allies and networks, not only within the disability movement, but within the overall marginalized and CSOs movement. This is what I wanted to add. Thank you.
That's fantastic. Thank you very much. I think that kind of brings us to the end of the questions. First of all, many thanks everybody who have added your questions to the chat boxes, and in particular, many thanks to the willingness of all our panelists for responding. I thought I'd just do a little summing up, really, just 4 key points, and I'm going to be very quick, really. So, I mean, firstly, obviously, you know, what we're hearing today is that we are looking at a shrinking space with, in terms of the civic space, with increasing violations of freedoms and participation. So with that shrinking space, it's becoming much harder for minority voices, for the diversity of voices to actually come through. And in energizing that civic space, we need, you know, new groups to be able to emerge and engage. But there does need to be understanding from the social justice movement and the civic space, but there also needs to be increased confidence by people with disabilities to actually engage in those spaces. Very important. In terms of challenges of identity and power, this also requires a civic space to make room for intersectionality and giving greater diversity to the voices, and moving much more away from the single identity and that kind of homogenous kind of group, you know, recognizing diversity, encouraging and making spaces for much more voices. And in terms of, there are an awful lot of opportunities that were raised. I think the one that resonated with me most was really something that Augustino, I think, said, which was that in terms of looking at the future, you know, really does require an awful lot of wisdom in order to redress the imbalance of power, and wisdom, you know, on all levels from all sides. I think it's been a really, really helpful and enlightening session today, and a big thanks to everybody. I'm now going to hand back actually to Marika to close the session and to give thanks. Many thanks to you from me.
Thanks a lot, Jazz. So after this great summary, all that is left for me is to say thank you. First of all, thank you to the IDDC membership, and especially the Secretariat, for making this webinar possible. You are behind the scenes, and I know you do a lot that we don't necessarily notice. Also, thank you to Karen, Ruby, Jazz, and the task groups for organizing this, but most of all, thank you, Deborah, thank you, Agostino, thank you, Seta, and thank you, Pratibha. It's been great to share and for you to share your experiences with you. I've learned a lot, and I was very inspired, and I have the feeling from the chat and the questions that others were as well. For everybody, a lovely evening, and thanks for joining us today. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Stay well.
You too.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Good.